So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we are on the Barrow Downs, which is a map I honestly quite like because it is obviously a field battle, but it does have these rather interesting landmarks that are dotted all around the place, which make it far more interesting than just a standard flat field. One of the things that I am really looking forward to in 0.97 is the fact there's going to be a lot more maps added, which are field battles but have a little bit more interest to them, and this is the sort of battle that I'm talking about. Obviously it is in 0.96, but this is the sort of thing we can expect a little bit more of. There's more interest throughout the map, and just in general it offers for a few more different types of plays, because obviously, you know, we've all seen the grassy plains. Very similar tactics tend to get used on the grassy plains pretty consistently, and just adding a little bit more to each map does mean that there can be a little bit more variety in what actually happens. And today we will be having a good versus evil match. I hesitate to call it lore friendly because I don't really think that Lothlorien and Mirkwood, who are on the other side of that mound over there, would ever find themselves facing off against Umbar and Carnd. It's rather a long way for particularly Carnd to move, although I suppose considering most of them are horseback riders it's not too much of a stretch. But yeah, so we have essentially both of the Sylvan Elf factions against two of the Evil Men factions, so place your bets with regards to who's going to win. Based on this map, there are a few areas where you can back yourself up into a more defensible position. That is one of the benefits of these mounds, and obviously the rocks means there is an area you can back yourself up to. And for the elves in particular, this is quite useful because it does mean that they won't be overloaded quite so easily by the superior numbers of, in particular, Carnd. Umbar are a little bit more quality centric, just like them. So Carnd in particular, we'll see how their numbers do for them here, and obviously based on the look of their army, it does actually look like they've gone more infantry heavy than cavalry heavy, which I think is an interesting move. But we'll go through the blue team first of all, the elves. So it is worth saying, of course, that both Mirkwood and Lothlorien, both of the Sylvan Elf factions, are going to have some pretty substantial changes. Lothlorien in particular, I think, actually both of them are going to be very substantially changed. I would say that Mirkwood, it's more because of a new unit in particular in the shape of the Ents, which drastically changes the way that they can be played, whereas Lothlorien, it's much more about retooling their existing units, and in particular their archers, to give them their own identity. Because at the moment, you know, one of the criticisms that I would give to Lothlorien in 0.96.1 is the fact they don't really have their own identity. Yes, they're a little bit more aggressive and they do have a lot of damaging units. They have more AP in melee than any of the other elven factions, but you know, Mirkwood do have a bit of AP as well. You know, Linden can deal their own armor-piercing damage with their javelins. Imladris are just better at doing the whole armor and heavy-duty infantry thing. Lothlorien just don't have enough of an identity in 0.96.1 for me. They're still very, very strong, don't get me wrong. You know, you really don't want to go toe-to-toe with a quality-focused Lothlorien infantry line, because you will live to regret it dearly. But it's good to see that in 0.97 they will be given their new archers, which will make them a lot more interesting to my mind, as well as more powerful as well. It'll give you a reason to pick Lothlorien over Imladris and Linden, who to my mind are significantly more powerful than the Sylvan, well, not significantly, but noticeably more powerful than the two Sylvan Elf factions in 0.96. So we've got some Ethel Tirith here on the front line. They of course have laid down their stakes, which presumably they were expecting Carnd to bring a lot of cavalry. They have sort of boxed themselves in here. Unstable Thrower, who sent me the replay, so big thank you to him. He has sort of boxed himself in up against the landmark features, and you know, the stakes would be useful if Carnd had gone for a very cavalry heavy build, but it doesn't look like they have, so we'll see how Carnd chooses to approach this. The Ethel Tirith will still be able to go to blow for blow with most of the basic Carndish archers pretty easily, especially when they're backed up by the more heavy-duty Lothlorien archers. But numbers could still be a problem for Lothlorien. You can see that one thing that Lothlorien have, as with most of the elven factions, but Lothlorien do need to invest a little bit more in their quality to really get the most out of their armies, which does mean very small armies. They also have a couple of units of Lothlorien spears here, the heavier Lothlorien spears backed up by the lighter Lothlorien spears, the Sylvan spears. So both of them, of course, again, it's more anti-cavalry, but not a lot of anti-cavalry needed, as we've already said, but even so, Elven Spears, they have enough skill to the point where they will still be able to go toe-to-toe with most of the Carndish infantry force without too many problems. Obviously, when you start to get to the more elite units, they may have a little bit more of an issue. Maitha Ilas Galan, obviously the Javelin units for any Elven faction that has them are going to be very potent, because obviously elves are more about their quality. They also double as spears in melee, so that's yet more potential anti-cavalry that Lothlorien have brought. Of course, Lothlorien, in order to counter cavalry, they do need to tend to build their whole army around it, because they don't have any easy counters to go after enemies with. But even so, most of Lothlorien's anti-cavalry capabilities can also transition into just being sort of good against other units as well, and the Maith Ilasgalan, of course, armor piercing at range, definitely a part of that. Sylvan Staffmasters, very low base damage overall, but it is armor piercing base damage. But of course, the thing that sets the Sylvan Staffmasters apart is the fact that they have a huge defensive skill. You know, they are a melee tar pit in a very different way to the Barrow-wights, in a way that's not as effective as the Barrow-wights, to be honest, because the Barrow-wights are just sponges for all sorts of damage, whereas Sylvan Staffmasters, there are fewer of them, and also they don't have quite the same staying power in melee, but of course, especially, they don't have the same staying power against archers. Archers will rip through Sylvan Staffmasters very, very easily, just wearing tunics. But they do have a place in the Lothlorien lineup. They are cheaper than most of the other Lothlorien units, and they are difficult to hack their way through with low skill units as well, so we'll see how they do here. Haldir, we'll see if Haldir can survive a battle for once, as he is going to be part of the Sindar Arch unit. Of course, again, in 0.97 they will be given their custom projectile, which I believe for the Sindar Archers is the split shot, which is very, very potent actually. It's actually the stronger custom projectile between them and the Galathran nobles to my mind, although both is obviously a big step up from the basic. Karis Gladhorn's Guardians as well, obviously pikes, going to be very, very good on the front line, and also of course as pikes. I feel as though Unstable Throw's army was built with maybe Khand going cavalry heavy in mind. But once again, another example of a unit which can be used to brutal effect against the Khandish infantry regardless. Then we also have some Lothlorien Mounted Company good lancers, and they could actually be extremely effective considering the fact that Khand have not really gone for much cavalry, so they will be able to move around the field unmolested for the most part. And then also we have the Galathran Riders, of course, very, very potent horse archers, alongside Khan's Chieftain's Vanguard, as they're called in this patch, although the Storm Guard of Khand is what they have been renamed. I believe that's still their name anyway. Alongside them, they are the strongest horse archers, very, very powerful at range and in melee. Not a huge charge as with most horse archers, but still very, very good all-rounders. The problem Lothlorien have is often the fact that on horseback they do tend to get outnumbered quite brutally. But again, that's not going to be a problem in this case. Let's go and see what their allies have brought to the field today in the shape of Mirkwood. Mirkwood too have taken up position on this very nice patch of high ground here, which is going to be a real problem for Umbar, because they are probably already in range of this extremely expensive army that Blofrog has decided to take. It's a very small Mirkwood army, and that's because he's gone into the red limit very heavily on one particular kind of unit. He's also gone for some Hiriak on the front line, which he may have gone into the red limit here as well, but obviously this is just to hold the line for 4 units of Aradirith Amon Lank. It's an interesting gambit. They are a very good unit, the Aradirith Amon Lank. They're very potent at range, and of course they do pull out those axes in melee, which gives them armor piercing, and elves with battle axes are very, very good because they combine the AP you expect from that sort of unit with a level of skill that is not expected from a two-handed axe unit. But even so, it's a huge investment to go for 4 units of them. We'll see if that pays dividends against the interestingly laid out Umbar army across the way there. Got a couple of units of cavalry as well. Looks like a couple of units of Royekbin Amon Lank, of course. Again, spear cavalry. Very, very skillful. Mirkwood's cavalry is extremely deadly in melee against other cavalry. The problem it has is that it is fairly fragile to arrow fire, especially the Royekbin Amon Lank, because unlike the General's Bodyguard variant, which has multiple HP, this does not, so they'll start to die immediately as soon as they come under arrow fire, rather than having that safety net of the multiple HP. But still a very small army, but they do have a very nice position, and Umbar very much on the low ground here. We'll see if they can force their way up the punishing slopes. So Supreme Supremes is playing as Umbar, got some Balagai footmen out here on the flank. Of course they'll be used to try and zone out the Elk cavalry that Mirkwood brings to the field, but you can't really imagine them doing too much to wear down the front of Mirkwood's resistance there. Interesting little formation he's got going on here. Númenórean Shield Guard, very elite spears. Spears will be made a little bit more potent in 0.97 against cavalry. As for here though, their heavy armour and shields will certainly help them against the barrage of arrow fire which is about to come their way. He's also got a couple of units of Balagai footmen here. Very interesting formations that he's got going on here, sort of very layered. It looks very neat and tidy. We'll see how long that lasts when he comes under very rapid arrow fire from the top of that hill. Some Abrazani Nadubaweeb as well, one of the toughest archer units to bring down outside of General's Bodyguard units. Nice shields, very good armour. Even though they don't have the armour upgrade here, it's still very, very tough to work their way through the tabards and chain that they wear. And obviously they don't do the most damage, because that's what most heavily armoured archers like this are all about, a little bit more defensive in nature perhaps, but even so, they're going to be waiting to accept the damage coming their way, and there'll be a lot of it. Looks like we've got 3 units as well of the Castamir's Legion, which is a very sound move against Mirkwood, because Mirkwood are very capable of bringing a very strong infantry force, as with all of the Elven factions. As Umbar, you kind of need to choose whether to go into your quality or whether to try and leverage some of your cheaper Corsairs and go for a few other sort of strengths with regards to your army. But here, Supremes has gone for a little bit more quality in the Castamir's Legion. Based on the fact there is no Hiri Ek or Hiri Lung, the Castamir's Legion should be able to defeat the Hiri Alth. That's it, that was the heavy infantry unit. The Hiri Ek are the spears. Castamir's Legion, I think, should be able to beat them 1-1, although going up that hill and taking arrow fire all the way is probably going to have a pretty negative impact on their overall combat performance. Merc Cavalry, which basic melee cav like this is very, very useful, although the Mirkwood cavalry that's across the way will make mincemeat of them. They won't make mincemeat of the Warlords of Umbar. The Warlords of Umbar as knights will be able to hold their own. If they get a charge off, the Roy Akbin could be in trouble. But it's certainly not the easiest target for the Warlords of Umbar to go after either. Still though, very, very powerful, and they're going to be backed up by some pretty potent lances as well, the Númenórean lances. We'll see what the Umbar cavalry does, because based on how much the elves are on that hill, Umbar might just shift across and try to 2v1 the Lothlorien player across the way here. Let's go and see what Khan brought to the field today though. So we have XMR TOTT, and he has got couple of units, 3 units actually, of the upgraded Variag warriors on the front line. They've laid down some stakes. It was always going to be quite unlikely, to be honest, that Lothlorien frontally charged Khand with any cavalry, but still doesn't have to be prepared. And the Variag warriors are actually a good choice here, because as I've mentioned before, Khand lean into their AP a little bit with regards to their infantry. If you do go for an infantry heavy Khand build, most of the time you're going to be going for more of an AP focus, which against Lothlorien is not the worst thing you can do. Lothlorien do have more armour than both Mirkwood and Linden, but overall the skill is still going to be an issue. So having a heavy swordsman like this, particularly with the armour upgrade to make them just that little bit more tanky, is going to help out on the front line. They still won't win you the fight by any means. You're going to have to win the fight through other means, but it is still more efficient than, for example, just throwing a bunch of nomadic light infantry at Lothlorien, because they'll slaughter them all day long. Back here we have the archers, which may very well prove to be Khan's saving grace here. A couple of units of nomadic infantry, got some nomadic raiders as well. The nomadic infantry obviously double as decent melee infantry as well, but again it is the elves they're facing off against, so certainly not the easiest task. Nomadic raiders much weaker both at range and in melee, but still quantity is the name of the game here, as it often is against the elves for the evil men. Full line of Nurad footmen. Very good shields, decent armour. They'll be able to withstand the Lothlorien arrows a little bit better than pretty much all of the other Khandish infantrymen. However, once they get into melee, the lower skill will hurt. You know, the AP, it does help a little bit against Lothlorien, but the AP is much more useful against the Western Kingdoms of Men and the Dwarves than it is against the Elves. But, you know, even within Ladris, because the Elven skill is such a factor, that Nurad footmen do tend to struggle, especially if they don't have the backup that's needed, and I'm not sure whether Khan do have the backup. There's a few units of Nurad halberds here on the flank, which, I mean, to be fair, there's only 1 unit of Lothlorien pikes on display. With a large amount of these G halberds that they've got going on, maybe the phalanx could really come to their rescue here. Over here we do have some Variag bowmen as well, again with the armour upgrade, leaning quite heavily into trying to make their force a little bit more tanky, maybe a little bit more focused around attrition based warfare. The General's Bodyguard, of course, the Nurad Warchief Retainers, very similar actually to the Claris Galadhon's Guardians across the way, in that they are the only multiple HP unit of their class, and they are a phalanx unit as well. They're brutal if you can't break down their phalanx, then they will be a real nightmare for you to deal with. But I do feel as though with the Claris Galadhon's Guardians, Lothlorien basically have the built sort of killing machine for the Nurad Warchief Retainers. There's also the Black Powder Watcher over here, which this I think also, alongside the archers, in fact even more so than the archers, could be what Khand are putting their faith in here. Because Lothlorien, if they lose too much of their manpower, they're really going to struggle. And the Watcher, over a course of time, the Watcher's always going to hit something. It won't necessarily wipe out the entirety of a single unit, but it will do a fair amount of damage across your entire army if you just sit there and take it. So Lothlorien, I think they were hoping to adopt a very defensive posture here. Khand could take that away from them potentially, but the terrain also could get in the way here, so they certainly don't have the easiest shots. And if they put their Watcher too far forward, the Elven Archers are just going to shred through them. And then finally, over here, we do have a couple of units of Nomadic Marauders on the flank. They need to get back to the rest of their army quickly, otherwise the Lothlorien cavalry will charge them down, and they could be a very potent tool. Obviously, hand-thrown projectiles can do a lot of damage very, very, very quickly. But without further ado, I think we'll start off over here, purely because I think Mirkwood are already in range. Let us begin. Yeah, the Aradirith are already in range, and it's going to be nasty here for Umbar, you would have to say. I mean, it is the Abrazanim Nadu Barweeb, and this is, to be honest with you, what the Abrazanim Nadu Barweeb are all about. Standing on the front line and absorbing arrow fire, but it's one thing to stand in the way of sort of militia archers and very basic ammunition and archers with poor training. It's quite another to go up against some of the best archers that Mirkwood can field. And you can see already the Abrazanim Nadu Barweeb have had their manpower shredded. Meanwhile, the Belagaya footmen are coming across here. That's a very interesting charge by the Royakbin. Both of them following one another in. They did actually get a lot of kills off the charge, but the longer they stay there, this is going to be very bad for the Mirkwood cavalry. Like I mentioned, the Mirkwood cavalry, the thing that they lack is survivability. There is, however, the crossbow corsairs, so this may actually prove to be worthwhile. We shall see. That was a lot. I mean, pulling through those spears was painful to look at. I think the crossbow corsairs actually also do have a very slight anti-cavalry bonus in melee, just owing to their the harpoons that they use. But also you can see here the second unit of hidden crossbow corsairs, so there was ambush forces here from Umbar, and already the Mirkwood cavalry is in tatters. And this goes to show the issue with the Mirkwood cav. You know, on the initial charge they did a lot of damage to the Belagaya footmen. They're fantastic in melee with other cavalry, they've got a good charge, but if you leave them hanging around in a dangerous area for too long, they are fragile. And unfortunately for them, you know, keeping the Royakbin back in reserve, waiting for the advance of the Umbar cavalry may very well have been the best move, because the Royakbin would have been able to do a decent job against the Umbar cav, but now the Umbar cav may very well be able to have free reign. We shall see. Meanwhile, a few little interesting movements here from Lothlorien as well. You can see the Galatharan riders getting into a position, I think, to try and poke away at the Umbar cavalry, although if they're going after the warlords of Umbar, they're actually going after the Númenórean lance, I think. But even so, good armour and good shields. I mean, this is some of the deadliest arrows that you'll see in the game, but again, it's maybe not the best target. At least the Galatharan riders are able to use their ammunition. Khand are actually the ones that are moving in here. I would say that Khand don't need to do this. You can see here that all of these Khandish archers are going to get into position to try and do a bit of damage to the main Lothlorien position, but the worst thing that Khand could do here would be to wheel their Hwacha into range of the Elven archers, because there's no way that Unstable Thrower doesn't see that immediately and rip through the Hwacha crew. And the Hwacha could be such a good unit to use in this situation. Also, sending forward the archers without the immediate backup of any anti-cavalry units is immediately going to draw the attention of the Lothlorien Mounted Company. You can see the nomadic the nomadic infantry there taking a lot of damage very, very quickly, and the Nurad footmen are the quick response force, which they're not anti-cavalry. Their armour piercing won't, again, not entirely useless against Lothlorien units, but it's really not what they needed. Good to see that Supremes is sending over some support. However, the mercenary cavalry should be able to zone out some of the Lothlorien forces, but not all of it. My question now would be whether that Hwacha can get in position. The Hwacha should absolutely move up onto this hill over here, staying out of range of the Elven archers. It's not as if Mirkwood are going to move forward. You know, Mirkwood are definitely bottled up on that hill. Their composition has basically made the decision for them. If the Hwacha gets up over here, they'll have the perfect overwatch fire into the Lothlorien army, and that would be very, very nasty for them indeed. Mercenary cavalry just hanging around here on the periphery. The Galatharan riders pulling away. The Galatharan riders have taken a bit of damage. I did notice some of their units were actually stuck. Still stuck, actually. It does go to show how tough these units are, because they've been stuck in there for quite some time, and they're still trying to get away. At least one of them is. But again, Khand are moving forward here, and their line is far too stretched. Launching an assault on Lothlorien's defensive positions here is not going to yield anything other than the deaths of these Nurad footmen. Nurad footmen tanking these arrows from the front, which, to be honest with you, is probably the best use of the Nurad footmen in this match. They're not going to do a lot in melee. If you can get Lothlorien to use all their ammunition on the front of the Nurad footmen, where their shields are going to be coming into full effect, do it. Don't try and engage them in melee, because the Karas Galadhon's Guardians will absolutely destroy you, as well as those Lothlorien units as well. And I feel as though this it's a very stretched feel to this battle already, not the most comprehensive advance, and Lothlorien will be thrilled that this is how Khand have decided to try and go about things. Meanwhile, Mirkwood are moving into position as well. We can actually see over here that the rear guard of Umbar are shifting over to potentially try and 2v1 Lothlorien, and with Mirkwood's very odd army composition, Mirkwood are not in a position to immediately respond to this. What's left of the Royak bin Ammon Lank will surely not last all that much longer. Yeah, they're already routing and broken, so that's going to be the end of the Mirkwood cavalry. And on the open field now, those Númenórean Lance and Warlords of Umbar could make life very, very horrible for Mirkwood if they chose to. Castamir's Rangers are also in position. That body piercing is going to be very nasty, particularly how blobbed up Mirkwood's very small army is. Ugh. Grisly indeed. The mercenary cavalry is also swinging around, and you can see the jaws are starting to close. Body piercing arrows from the front, cavalry starting to go around from the flanks. The Aradirith, there's a lot of Aradirith there to be fair, which is going to do a lot of damage, but I can't imagine Mirkwood are going to be in for a very good time over on that side. Meanwhile, the Nurad footmen are still fighting, but they are shaken. Of course, this is one of the problems you will have to put up with as Khan. Other than Umbar and, depending on composition, Rune, all of the Evil Men factions do tend to have this issue with morale. You know, alongside the Orcs and a specific example in Cardolan, morale is something you have to manage in your faction much more actively. When you're playing as the Elves, you don't tend to need to worry about that quite so much. You know that most of your troops are going to stand and fight. But with the Evil Men, you certainly need to have a more organised opening to your battle. When the chaos ensues and the enemy lines start falling apart, then it's not so much of an issue for you to just let your men run amok like an angry mob. But early on, you definitely can't afford to just manically charge in, because the more organised defenders, in this case, in Lothlorien, will just easily be able to hold you at bay. The Variag warriors are in here, but they're already shaken as well, and they're one of the better suited men for dealing with a unit like Sylvan Spears. Yeah, and this is a disaster for Khan. You can see the Black Powder Watcher pushed itself far, far too close. In fact, they pushed it so close in the end that it wasn't the Elven Archers that came for them, but Elven Spearmen. Which is crazy when you think about it, but still, Khan's advance is definitely being held in check by Lothlorien so far. But on the other side of things, it is the Evil Men who are having the better of this engagement. I think Mirkwood, seeing the position they were in, have sort of manically charged forward in an effort to try and effect some sort of change here. But you can see that Umbar able to hold the Mirkwood Spearmen in place. The Corsair Blackguards and the Archers and the Crossbows are going to be able to do a lot of damage as well. Getting in and around the back as well, you can see the Aradirith Ammon Lank, which are very strong in melee as well, and honestly the Castamir's Legion will not enjoy being in melee with them at all. But this is going to be the real problem. The fact that the Umbar Cavalry now has free reign to charge into the Aradirith Ammon Lank, inflicting grievous, grievous losses on Mirkwood very quickly. The Merc Cavalry is also coming in here for a slice of the action as well, although they're certainly not going to be able to get as much done. Not only that, but they're also, the longer they stay in melee, the Aradirith are going to really start to tear through them. But the Númenórean Lancers will be able to pick up the slack anyway, and the Warlords of Umbar being kept in reserve, which is a bad sign if you're Lothlorien. Basically, all Khan needs to do is perform more efficiently against Umbar, or perform more efficiently against Lothlorien rather, than Mirkwood is managing to perform against Umbar. Those Númenórean Lancers though, very good day for them indeed, because those Aradirith are high quality kills that they're able to feast upon here. Nurad War Chief Retainers are coming in. It's very much a bit of a chaotic fight at this point. Meanwhile, Maitha Ilazgalan, they're not daft. They know what units are dangerous, and they're going after the Nurad War Chief Retainers. By far and away the most deadly of the Khandish infantrymen. The Brotherhood of the Axe and Sword are also very good. But the Nurad War Chief Retainers have the added boost, as it were, of being a multiple HP phalanx unit, which, if you play your cards right, is such a difficult thing to deal with. Variag Bowman trying to shoot into what remains, they're actually trying to shoot into the Karas Galadhon's Guardians, which is not the worst idea. They may be multiple HP, but they're still pikes. Meanwhile over here, the Variag Warriors, looks like they actually did not too badly against the Sylvan Spears, but the reinforcements from the Sylvan Staff Masters, I think, will finally be enough to finish the Variag Warriors off. We don't often see the Variag Warriors put in a good showing, because very often they're put into situations against factions like the Elves where they tend to get dumpstered. But here, a valiant effort. There's also some Umbar units actually over here from the Balagaya Footmen, so getting round here to try and interrupt the Maitha Ilazgalan. I can see some Halberds, but the Halberds are also routing, at least one unit of them are. Sindar Archers are in melee now as well, pulling out their two Elven Blades and going to work alongside the Archers and the Spearmen. But again, I mean, Lothlorien will win this fight over here, of that I have little doubt at this point, but Khan are putting up a decent fight, and over here with the very weird composition, I must say. I mean, to be fair, one of the benefits of playing a faction like Mirkwood and going for nothing but like higher end units like this is even when Umbar sort of do well and enact their battle plan well, Mirkwood's units are such that you're always going to take losses, even against when you're dealing with units like Castamir's Legion here. Like you can see over here, look, even though the Aradirith have been essentially stomped into the dirt by the Númenórean Lancers are very haggard at this point. And not only that, but the Aradirith might end up winning that fight, although there goes Thranduil. Now that the Warlords of Umbar have been added to the fray, and there is a case for saying maybe they should have just been added immediately. I mean, when you've got 4 Aradirith Amon lined up like Skittles, you send the Warlords of Umbar in, because they'll tear through them. A charge bonus of 20 is too good to pass up, and this fight already would have been won if that had been the case. But Umbar are going to win over here regardless. Crossbow Corsairs, and that of course means that Umbar are going to be able to crest this hill and try and come to the aid of what's left of Khan, although I would suggest, based on how this, how the lay of the land is looking now, Khan are not going to have all that much left. There's some Galathrun riders around the back. These Khandish archers are still trying to do the best they can. Forward come the Maitha Ilazgal and the Nomadic Raiders, pulling out their swords in melee. Those Lothlorien archers are very depleted at this point, so... You can see over here though, the Variag Warriors, a second unit of Variag Warriors, or is this the same one? I'm not sure, because they were quite stretched after all. Still trying to hold back the advance of the elves on this flank. Yeah, the Hwacha crew is most certainly a thing of the past. I have to say, I'm actually quite impressed with how the Variag Warriors have managed to hold up against the elves here, all things considered. There's Karas Galadhon's Guardians going toe-to-toe with the Nurad War Chief Retainers. Yeah, and there go Mirkwood. Mirkwood's very alien composition ending up being far too much of a liability for them to be really all that useful in this battle, but we'll see. Can Lothlorien's quality see them over the line? Because Umbar are still wounded, but I do still fear for Lothlorien just because Umbar do have some ranged threats still. I'd be very surprised if they didn't have crossbowmen that have ammunition left, which is going to be a real problem for Lothlorien unless they can use the Galathrun Riders, but of course then there's also the added threat of the Warlords of Umbar still very much active. Meanwhile, the Khandish forces still doing their best to try and make it as difficult as possible for Lothlorien, utilising that ammunition, trying to get as many kills as they possibly can, so as to give their allies the best possible chance. And if that Hwacha had just been used, if just a single volley from the Hwacha had gone off, this fight, I would be very, very much on board with the evil men winning this, but I'm not so sure at this point because I've seen the high-tier Elven units withstand an awful lot of punishment, and especially if the Warlords of Umbar come charging into the Karas Galadhon's Guardians, that could be a game changer all of its own. Meanwhile, still a couple of units of Umbar forces back here. They've held on for quite some time as well, although they're up against Sindar archers and Haldia now, so that's probably not going to last for too much longer. Here come the Warlords of Umbar, which honestly, the Warlords of Umbar, I'm coming down in favour of the evil men just because of the Warlords of Umbar, to be honest with you. Having a unit of knights that's pretty healthy at this point in the battle is a daunting thing to have to face if you're the elves. Even if you've got pikes and spears, I did notice a few javelins come throwing in there as well, which honestly the javelins might be Lothlorien's best chance at dealing with that. We shall see. Galathrun Riders taking a little bit of arrow fire there from the few Variag Bowmen that are left alive, although they would do very well not to charge into the Variag Bowmen, because craftily XMR has positioned his bowmen within the stakes. Ooh, please tell me this isn't going to be is Unstable Thrower noticed, or is he going to charge in? Ooh, the Variag Bowmen, I think they're actually going to move behind the stakes, which actually will allow the Galathrun Riders potentially to go around. They're actually better off in the stakes, because that means that it would be impossible to charge them without taking losses, at least from that angle. Meanwhile, Umbar probing the Elven lines, the Sindar archers taking damage from the unmistakable whistle there of a crossbow. And both of the crossbow corsairs firing away. Belagair archers. The problem that Umbar may have though, they don't have that much infantry left alive, honestly. They've got a lot of ranged power, but they don't have much infantry. The Corsair Blackguards revealing themselves. Do they still have some ammo? It looks like they do. They're in their sort of javelin ready to be thrown position, but they need to kill the Karas Galadhon's Guardians. excuse me, because based on the amount of ammunition, well, based on the amount of infantry they still have, there's no way they beat the Cardolan's Guardians without killing them off. Like, everything else is secondary to killing off those pikemen at this point. Meanwhile, Lothlorien riders charging uphill, getting a charge into the crossbow corsairs, already shaken. There's the Númenórean lads. Whatever happened to the warlords? Ah, there they are. The warlords of Umbar, of course, as well. Like, a few rear charges on the lighter elven infantry. It's going to do an awful lot of damage. But again, they need to be very careful, because if they charge into the heart of the Cardolan's Guardians, a lot of them will die very quickly. There goes Haldir, with his customary death every time he's on screen. Lothlorien, they can never be allowed to end the battle with their general. It's canon that he dies. It has to be, every time, regardless of what the battle is. Meanwhile, the warlords of Umbar, you can just see the devastation of a knight's charge there. Crushing through those Tirith, chipping away at the elven manpower. It is a close one, this, though. There's very little left on both sides, and to be honest with you, I mean, Khan still coming in with those Variag bowmen, giving a little bit of support, and it's fine margins here. Those are the margins which this fight could be won or lost by. Tirith coming in here as well, trying to stop the Corsair Blackguards from shooting their payload. The Cardolan's Guardians, though, are down to 10. As valiant as this elven last stand is, ooh, that was a very foolish move there from Supremes. I mean, fortunately it wasn't devastation. If that had been just a few inches to the right or left, that entire cavalry unit could have perished by charging through the stakes, but as it was, he charged through the gap between the two mostly. Because losing those warlords, like, the reason why I'm saying that I think Umbar should win this is because of the warlords. Like, I don't see Lothlorien being able to win against those knights. Whereas everything else, I'm not quite so sure. Meanwhile, Númenórean Shield Guard fighting over here. The Lothlorien riders managing to kill off the Variag bowmen, so finally the Khandish forces have been put to the sword. Lothlorien riders still fighting their hardest as well. Fighting their best fight. Those warlords of Umbar, what are they doing? They're in range of something, because they are dying. It's the Maitha Ilaz Galan who are still getting kills off, and the warlords of Umbar are dithering too long here, and their manpower is being bled. They're charging in now to spears. I don't know, I think the slowness with which the Umbar player has utilised his warlords of Umbar may prove to be their downfall here, because Umbar's army's fallen to pieces, their infantry's gone. It's down to crossbow corsairs in melee at this point, and that's when you know something's gone badly wrong. If you're relying on crossbow corsairs to try and stop elven horsemen, things are not looking good for you. And the Lothlorien riders are starting to turn around now. I'm not sure that Umbar have got what it takes to bring the Lothlorien riders down. There's still these Corsair Blackguards who are still just tearing into the Cardolan's Guardians. I don't know, it's gonna be real close. I don't know, those Corsair Blackguards, that's a real difficult thing to try and defeat. The warlords of Umbar, lances down. I think the Sylvan Staffmasters broke that charge up a little bit. Unfortunately for them, however, they're taking a bit of friendly fire from the back of their own archers, and javelins are also coming in there as well. Defeat seems certain for the warlords of Umbar. Still some Castamir's Legion down here facing off against what was, I think, the final Sindar archer on the field. So they're victorious. The Corsair Blackguards are also pushing in. Yeah, I mean, Umbar should still be fine. That's a lot of Cardolan's Guardians, a lot of Corsair Blackguards. The Blackguards and the Warlords of Umbar are just a bridge too far for the Elves this time, I think. They still have those Staffmasters, but they're nearly gone. A fat stack of Belagair archers that are still alive. A few more stragglers here and there. It was a final attempt from Lothlorien, to be fair. I think, especially considering the very weird composition that Merc would have brought, and how essentially they charged into the jaws of death against Umbar earlier in the battle. I think Lothlorien can certainly hold their head up high. I think it's fair to say the Merc player was of the newer variety, with a composition such as that. Khand, I think, Khand against Lothlorien is a tough one, I think, for Khand. I think if they had... I agree with the pick of the Hwacha. Against the Elves, the Hwacha can be so useful. just because it can get so many kills across their entire army. But unfortunately they wheeled it far too close to be useful. The terrain certainly coming to the aid of Lothlorien rather. Well, Corsair Blackguards facing off against the Maitha Il Asgalan, or at least what's left of them. The Galathran Riders are charging in here. That was a pretty decent charge, actually. I think the problem at this point is the fact that the Warlords of Umbar are just too slow to keep up with the Galathran Riders, though eventually the Galathran Riders are going to have to get into melee, you'd imagine. There's still 2 Karas Galadon's Guardians there. Our army loss is going to kick in, because it's very close to the end of the fight now. And I can't... Yeah, you can see there the Galathran Riders just went through the cheese grater, rather, through the Warlords of Umbar, and that certainly dealt a pretty hefty amount of damage there. Yeah, and as soon as the Galathran Riders are gone, that will be the end. A couple more of them are skewered, all 3 of them are skewered. Maitha Il Asgalan defeat is a distinct possibility. The pikemen are still there, though with only 2 of them, to be fair, the Warlords of Umbar could just charge into them and kill them. Although I say that, they held firm there. But I think it's going to be a rout at some stage here, I would imagine, from Lothlorien. Army losses should kick in. Maitha Il Asgalan are still fighting hard against the Corsair Blackguards, but there's still those Balagyr archers over there as well, firing at the Sylvan Staff Masters and killing them off. I think that should be it. Yeah, the Maitha Il Asgalan are shaken. Karas Galadon's Guardians being engaged by the Corsair Blackguards, and Umbar and Castamere is going to live to the end as well. And there they go. Killed to the last man. Very, very small amount of men left on the field though. And there we go. So the evil men winning in the fight against the Sylvan Elves, and Umbar certainly proving to be a strong faction indeed. I think Khand the Watcher was a good idea. I think if you're going to go infantry heavy against the Elves as Khand, you need the Watcher, just because the infantry quality, especially against sort of the more lightly armoured Elves, just isn't there. You know, against armoured factions, Khand can certainly do something in the infantry fight, despite being primarily a cavalry faction. But in this case, yeah, I feel as though the Watcher was always going to be a crutch, and as soon as they lost that, it was always going to be a case of, can Khand do more damage on this front to Lothlorien than Mirkwood can do to Umbar on the other side? And the answer to that, at least, was yes, from a Khandish perspective. Very weird composition from Mirkwood, again, from Blofrog. I think, you know, 4 Aradirith Amon Lank. I'm a big fan of the Aradirith Amon Lank. They're a terrific unit at range and in melee. But it's not worth bringing 4 of them, not for the extreme cost that would be. And also the heavy elven spears. I mean, I don't know, I think maybe he was hoping that he could just sit up on that hill and that the enemy would charge him, but you're under no obligation to do that in this game. Like, you can just shift across and go, fine, we'll just 2v1 your mate and we'll deal with you later. And he had to come down off his hill, he had to try and charge across to help him out, and Umbar then just turned around and surrounded him and hammer and anviled him with the cavalry, because the Royakbin were dealt with so early on that the Umbar cavalry was then given free rein. So yeah, well played to all involved. Big thank you to Unstable Thrower for sending this one to me. Let's see what did the damage for Unstable Thrower. What was the MVP for him? 570 on the Galathran Riders. They were active pretty much from moment 1, so that's unsurprising. Over 200 kills on the Karas Galadon's Guardians, very impressive. You know, 232 on the Sindar Archers as well. You'd expect this from the Elves, though, especially against killing off Khand first and then having to make a last stand against Umbar as well. You'd expect Lothlorien to get a lot of kills from that. So yeah, well played to everyone involved. I hope you enjoyed this. Next, I think we will be seeing another RP battle. I think we're going to see Khand again, actually, because I think it is going to be Imladris versus Khand on a very similar fortress to the one that we just saw not too long ago between Cardolan and Umbar. But yeah, so we are obviously coming to the end of 0.96 now, so I do want to get all of these RP battles that are ongoing out as quickly as I possibly can so that they don't become defunct. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.